Ken, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'd like you to deliver the sermon this morning, if you don't mind.
You're dismissed.
All right, it's the last in the summer series. Woo! Listen, great news. Welcome. I welcome Bob and Tim. Great things. And Jim. Jim? Hi, Jim and Mary. I think they are watching from London right now. So, anyway, listen, we got an issue we need to solve. We need your help on this, all right? Here's the issue. We need to have some Sunday school teachers. We need to have Sunday school teachers. The Gospel Project, the new thing they're going into, systematically teaching through scriptures and sharing that with kids and all the time directing them to become followers of Jesus. Does it get to be any better than that? No, but you need to have teachers. So here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to do. Nothing else today. I want you to pray one quick prayer. Lord, do you want me to help? Lord, do you want me to help? And if all of a sudden you got this, child ministry, the Welcome Center for the Children's Ministry, go and say hi to them and say, God was tapping me. Got it? All right, great. Listen, in 4 weeks we are going to be having a missions Sunday, whole week on missions, the stuff that we're doing, the visions, the dreams that we have, September 25th. All right. I have a new hip. Six weeks ago, a guy took out a part of my body and put in a new hip. It doesn't hurt. Woo! It doesn't, it is such, you just go, listen, they think about what they did. They took out a part of my body and they put in a new one. It's amazing. What a society we live in. Oh, that's great. Anyway, I also had my 65th birthday. Okay. I don't look a day over 64. I know. I understand that. But listen, here's something that's cool. I decided I didn't tell anybody about this. I decided I was going to take the whole day and I was going to just thank God for all the neat stuff in my life. And I spent the entire day going shh to myself. No one knew. Thanking God for the good things that he's done. What an enjoyable day it was. Can I just tell you that? So here, listen, here's the go. Next birthday, don't tell anybody. Spend the time. It doesn't have to be your 65th. You don't have to wait that long. Spend the time just thanking God for the good things in your life. Great thing. Okay, just to let you know as well, Brandon Barnes and I are going to be taking a pastoral visit to India in October, so you can be praying for that. So let's get right into the story. We're going to be learning about Abigail this morning. Abigail is a really remarkable woman in the Bible. And you got to kind of dig just a little bit there. And this is kind of a long story, so I've condensed the story a bit. So if you see a ... the ellipsis, I kind of cut stuff off, but it's from 1 Samuel 25 if you want to read along. So let's start there. I'm in 1 Samuel 25, verse 1. Now Samuel died, then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Maon who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. Her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. It's an Old Testament story. Basically, the background is this. After a series of judges, the people decided that they wanted to have a king. And so God granted this request, and the first king was a guy by the name of Saul, who started out well. But he didn't end up well because he kind of got imbalanced and a little bit, a lot paranoid, and his life kind of ended really poorly. The target of his paranoia was David, who was the next anointed king. Think of it like this. You know, like Prince Charles and the Queen Mother. What does Chuck do now? He kind of hangs around and he waits he waits until it's time for him to ascend to the throne. And because of Saul's jealousy and his paranoia, he attempted to kill David a bunch of times, which caused David to spend a bunch of time hiding out in the desert. Kind of understandable, with a bunch of supporters who needed to eat. So they scavenged, they raided, and then they asked for food to keep them alive. A little bit more about David. Here's some good news about David. David was a highly, highly talented guy, and we're told in Scripture that he was a man after God's own heart. He was a man after God's own heart. His core was to live for God. The bad news in this is that he was very human and at times failed miserably in his desire to live for the Lord. And so the story today is kind of like a parenthesis. If you read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, it's like Saul chasing David and all this kind of stuff. And then there's this parenthesis. And the parentheses is when we start to see Abigail. And inside that parentheses is an opportunity for God using Abigail to show some lessons that David needed to learn as he ascended or before he ascended to the throne. So that's David. Second character is a guy by the name of Nabal. Nabal. I'm glad I don't have that name. He is described as surly and mean. He's gruff, he's crabby, he's unfriendly. And we find out that his name, which might have been a nickname, means fool. He really was a wealthy bonehead. And then there's Abigail. She's intelligent, beautiful. It's important to remember that she lived in a time when there was not equality between men and women. Her marriage to Nabal the fool was most likely arranged, and so our contemporary concept of like a loving marriage relationship was probably not part of the deal. Think of it this way. You know those t-shirts that have like the big arrow and it says, "I'm with," right? If Abigail had the t-shirt on, it would say, "I'm with fool," and it would be pointing over to Nabal. So that's kind of the picture that goes in your head. And she really is the heroine of our story, which we need to read a little bit more about. So let's do that. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet them in my name. Say to them, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them.' When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message. Nabal answered David's servants, 'Who is this David? Who is this Jesse? Why should I take my bread and water and the meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?' David's men went back. When they arrived, they reported every word David said to his men. 'Each of you strap on your sword.' So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. So David had been kind of wandering around the desert trying to avoid Saul, and he needed food for his followers. And he heard about Nabal having this sheep shearing party. Think of it as it's kind of like, our Thanksgiving, harvest comes in, we eat, go woo, that kind of thing. That's what the sheep shearing party was like. It was a once a year kind of deal. It was a community event as well. It was a festival, and there were lots and lots of food around. So David sent 10 men to Nabal and asked them for some food. Background: previously, David and his men had provided protection for Nabal's shepherds while they were out raising these sheep. So it kind of seemed like a reasonable request. He had every reason, that is David, had every reason to believe that he'd get a favorable response. But Nabal lived up to his name and he acted like a fool. Not only did he deny the request, he denied it with arrogance and with insult. He knew David was the anointed king, yet he denied him. The fool really is a good descriptor. So, when David heard that Nabal said, he acted out decisively. All right, guys, let's get ready for battle. Put on your swords, boom, boom, boom. Nabal had denied a legitimate request from the future king, was not wise, and David was mad. But in this, David made a mistake. David made a mistake. What's not in the text? What step didn't David take? He didn't pray about it before his men armed themselves. He just reacted. He didn't inquire of the Lord. He acted ahead of God. And impetuous reactions are not a very good character for a future king. It's a lesson that David needed to learn. David's determination to avenge Nabal's insult clouded his ability to see anything beyond the immediate snub. He overreacted. The story continues. And as it continues, we switch from the picture from David's perspective, and we switch it more to the Nabal camp. So we're kind of moving into the Nabal camp here. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead. I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there were David and his men descending toward her, and she met them. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant, my lord. Let me speak to you. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He's just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And now, my lord, as surely as your Lord the God, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my lord be like Nabal. And let this gift, which your servant has brought to my lord, be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my lord, because you fight the Lord's battle, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. My Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself. Even Nabal's servants realized there was a crisis ahead. And so one of them goes up to Abigail. That was a combination of Nabal and Abigail together, by the way, if you wanted to know what that word was that I said. Okay? Don't worry, I'll be mocked about that later. One approaches Abigail and says, you got to do something. Nabal is just not going to get it. He's just not going to get it. And quite frankly, we're doomed. And so we start to see the extraordinary nature of Abigail. First thing, she acted quickly, we're told. She didn't take time for like one of these kumbaya round-robin discussion sorts of things. She needed to act, or all of her men and all of her men, all of her clan would be killed in short order. So what does she do? She makes a meal. She makes a meal. How much wisdom does that show? Actually, it shows a lot. Because David and his crew were hungry. They probably hadn't eaten in days. And she understood, women, that a way to a man's heart is through his, there you go. So look what she brought. Look what she brings. Bread. Bread is dough ready to eat. She brings wine. Wine is grapes ready to drink. She brings sheep that are dressed. Sheep, that's meat that's prepared and ready to cook. Roasted grain, raisin cakes, pressed figs, you get the point? This is like Abigail brings MREs, the meals ready to eat, for David and his men. Let me illustrate that with two pictures. There's a before and an after picture here. I don't even need to say more, okay? So anyway, here's this goat. It was given to me. But it's like a gift for our team in Haiti and for you guys, for all the work you do. They so much appreciate what we do. Huge gift. Well, the goat was not ready to eat. In fact, it was 3 days before it made it to the table. And because we didn't want to take, typically the way you transport goats, or you tie them upside down to your vehicle, and as you go down the mountain, it bangs the goat all the way down. It's not something we wanted to do because we felt that might be a little disruptive. So anyway, we asked Pastor Cillian if he would bring the goat to Jephthah's compound. I'm a carnivore, so just get over it. All right, to Jephthah's compound. So we funded the hire of a motorcycle. Pastor put it on his lap on the motorcycle. It took 2.5-hour trip to make the delivery the next day. And the goat was prepared and later shared with 40 people. And you can see what it was. Good. All right. Connor says he agrees with me. It was good. Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference here? If Abigail gave a bunch of raw food items, it would have taken a long time to prepare. And it wouldn't have just been the food that was simmering. It would have been David who was simmering as well. She's smart. She realized that a full stomach diffuses anger quickly. And once the food was gathered, she sent her servants ahead. She didn't tell Nabal. She rides out by herself. Now here's an image that you need to take. 400 men with swords strapped on, bloodthirsty eye look, coming down, it says, descending through the ravine. And Abigail, on her donkey, riding up to meet them. That is a picture of courage. That is a picture of courage. She met them and immediately bowed down, working to dispel David's anger by being humble before him, letting him know she recognized him as the future king. She started the conversation with true words spoken about her husband. Pay no attention. He's like his name, a fool, and folly goes with him. So, a little bit of an aside. Here's the question, always comes up. Was Abigail being a bad wife here, not acting in submission to her husband? I don't see it that way. I don't think she was dissing her husband. In fact, she was speaking truth, and she was acting to save her husband and all of his men from death. I'm going to give you a spoiler alert coming up here. I'm going to give you the rest of the story. At the end of the story, David marries Abigail. I'm sorry I had to tell you, okay? Sorry I had to. One of the commentaries on the passage included an interesting thought about Abigail being disloyal. this guy by the name of Constable, and he writes this: if David had interpreted Abigail's description of her husband as being disloyal, it is doubtful David would have asked her to marry him later. She might have proved disloyal to him too. You see, it's really powerful, really. The answer is, was she being disloyal? Well, David didn't see it that way, and he was there. So I guess I can let that one rest. So after Abigail worked through the crisis her husband created without working outside of her role as a wife. And Abigail worked as a messenger from God. We've already said that David was acting impetuously. Abigail, prompted by God, was able to see beyond the heat of the moment and keep her eyes on the big picture as she appealed to David. First, she presents the request as a decision made. She leads David in the right direction. This is wise, by the way. And listen, and now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, when does this happen? It happens when David is riding down the ravine, working himself into battle mode, and is stopped by a woman who says, I'm glad that the Lord has stopped you from doing this wrong deed. She says, I'm glad you agree with God. He's still on his way down to kill them. So you have to give her credit. This is a pretty smart move. And she goes on to present her case. She continues, if you do this killing, you'll be avenging yourself. It won't be for God. You'll be avenging yourself with your own hands. It will be behavior outside of God's will. And it will be a tragic mistake that will follow you all through your life. And I love this next line. She says, and let this gift which your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the men who follow you. She says, why don't you let the men have a meal and let God work through all of this? It's brilliant. It's brilliant. She continues, you are God's anointed. You need to fight God's battle. And she tells him this: don't let a knee-jerk reaction of needlessly shedding blood to avenge yourself become a staggering burden for your future kingship. Don't let it happen. Now, if she were speaking to Nabal, it'd be easy to see his response. He'd ignore her. But Abigail was speaking to David, a man after God's own heart. Story continues. David said to Abigail, praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought him and said, go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request. The crisis is averted. God used Abigail to direct David away from his vengeance and from sin. And if you think about it, she's kind of an unlikely character to have done that, to correct a future king. She is a woman, the wife of an enemy. She came to him humbly, rationally, courageously, just the way God wanted her. And David had the ears to hear. He was a man after God's own heart, and God helped him hear. So, what kind of lessons can we get from this? Who's God using to keep you on course? Who is God using to keep you on course? Is it a trusted Christian friend? Is it a spouse, a sibling, a non-believing co-worker? Keep your ears open, because God can use anyone to tap you on the shoulder. I doubt David's first response when he saw Abigail was, coming down the hill, oh, there's the person God has sent to keep me from heading in the wrong direction. Abigail was God's messenger and teacher, and David listened. Tell you a quick story. A little bit embarrassing. Over 40 years ago, soon after I'd become a follower of Jesus, I worked at a Boy Scout camp. And I decided that some of the staff's behavior did not match with the tenets of my newfound faith. So I took on the role of convincing them that they were wrong. That's not a good thing, by the way. That was bad. I cringe when I think about that now. Anyway, one day, a friend at the luncheon table, a non-believer, looked at me and said, "Would you stop being so self-righteous?" My words were blocking people from hearing the gospel, not moving them toward Jesus. So it was like a slap in the head. God used that non-believing friend to help me work on a needed course correction. Who are the people in your life that you look to for navigation? Another lesson. David was the anointed king and he sought to be obedient to God. But he was flawed and God still used him. Here's the good news. If God chose to use David in his imperfection, he can use all of us. He knows that I can't be perfect, but he is joyful when I strive to live for him. He's joyful when I strive to live for him. So let's make that our life goal. Let's strive to be people who passionately want to follow Jesus. It's the third lesson. I need to make sure I get the order correct. It's crisis, prayer, response, not crisis, response, prayer. Someone came up to me after the last service and said, it's CPR, crisis, prayer, response. So what happened to Nabal? When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits and very drunk. Then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like stone. About 10 later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. Then David heard that Nabal was dead, and he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then here we go. Then David sent word to Abigail asking her to become his wife. All right. So Nabal thought he was like this big man, that he was in charge, but disaster was right around the corner. It's a bad idea to ignore God. It's a bad idea to ignore God. So the final lesson. God doesn't lose control. David didn't need to seek revenge, take matters into his own hands. It doesn't mean that God won't use you to bring justice in some situation. But I need to remember that impetuous nearsightedness, I'll say it again, impetuous nearsightedness can blind me from seeing God's greater purpose. Impetuous nearsightedness can blind me from seeing God's greater purpose. God was very, very capable of handling Nabal. Abigail was an extraordinary woman used by God for deliverance. She delivered her husband even though he later did himself in. She delivered her family and the rest of the clan, the servants. And she delivered the person from whom she was seeking deliverance. David was saved from making a big mistake when Abigail asked him to spare the lives of her clan. She is a woman of extraordinary deliverance. We pray? Thanks, Father, for all that you have given us. Thanks for the story of Abigail. Thanks for her example. Thanks for the things that we can learn from her. Thanks for the things that we can learn that David learned because of Abigail. We praise you today in Christ's name. Amen.